It's been a while once again, but welcome back to the Box Jumper Podcast. As always, I'm your host, JasonCFMedia. It seems there's a bit of controversy everywhere you go lately, and as you might expect, the CrossFit space isn't immune to those pressures. Whether it's being called out for so-called bad reps on an official competition video submission or not, to reactions to decisions made at the highest level of the CrossFit organization down to your local box, someone somewhere is bound to have something to say. And on more than one occasion, the displeasure of the few can blow up into controversy that takes on a life of its own. It's not easy to stay above that fray, and in fact, there can be a natural temptation to lean into it. Let's face it, if you're trying to build a voice and a following on the internet, nice tends not to get you very far. The loudest, most antagonistic voice is often the one that everyone hears. My guest today has done what is rare in the ever-polarized space of CrossFit punditry. His name is Jason Croxton, though many of you will likely know him from his handle at JasonCFMedia on YouTube and Instagram. If you're a regular consumer of content in CrossFit, you've likely come across a video or two of his at the very least. The YouTube algorithm, after all, will match you up with other CrossFit-related channels, large and small. What sets Jason's channel apart is threefold. First, its earliest episodes remain at their heart commentary from a fan of CrossFit. Clearly not just the elite athletes, but CrossFit as a methodology. Second, the quality and thoughtfulness of the topics. Jason's early episodes were a bit like a college professor gaming out different scenarios on the whiteboard for students to think about. Little, if any, judgment or nudging in a direction, but focused on arming the viewer with the tools necessary to have a real discussion on the topic at hand. And finally, and this is a recent pivot, entertainment. Not that the earliest videos aren't entertaining, they most certainly are. But in an effort to keep his channel fresh and keep content flowing, Jason has reignited his Plate Stack Chat podcast after a considerable hiatus, and now welcomes some stellar and well-known guests from the CrossFit world to discuss what's on their minds, while capably helping to shape the discussion and keep the conversation going. And as we discuss in our chat, sometimes controversial topics are exactly what people are looking for, but without giving anything away, that's not how Jason plays the game. In 10 seconds, I'll speak with Jason about his passion project, how it stays above the fray, as he seeks to remain an impartial voice of reason even while the debate rages around him. Jason Croxton, otherwise known as JasonCFMedia. Welcome to the Box Jumper Podcast.
Oh, thank you. Do you know, I always want to call it the Box Jump Over Podcast. and
Even worse.
And when I listen, it's because of your Instagram handle that is.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Over,
the Box Jumper over 40. Yeah.
Yeah. And
sadly,
so,
Box Jumper was long gone by the time I decided to grab an Instagram handle.
So still, every time you say it, you're like, welcome to the Box Jumper. And I'm like, over? No, okay.
But my heart rate gets elevated just thinking about box jump overs.
Oh, love them. I'm here. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. It feels a little weird because I'm so used to your voice being in my head when I'm listening to your podcast and or watching your videos. Now that you're doing quite a mixture of both, really. You're a podcaster that likes to interview other people within the CrossFit space, and that's exactly what I've spent the last couple of years trying to do in getting my podcast running. So we have fairly similar sensibilities about what we're attempting to do with what we're publishing. But you have really grown very substantially over the last little while, something that I have not managed to do. So you're on a variety of other podcasts in addition to your own. I'm curious. Was this where you envisioned going when you first got started? What were your humble beginnings?
Oh, wow. Well, first, I mean, have I grown? I don't know. This is funny because I've been on other podcasts recently, mm-hmm. which were even interesting in the way I got on some of them. But they've always been like in a role, if that makes sense, like fulfilling a role on the podcast. It's not that anybody wanted to know much about me. So this is the first time that it's like, I was on a podcast, Chalking Fitness, a long time ago, which was one of my former co-hosts of the original Plate Stack Chat, Tom. He used to run that, but he's a dad now and he's very busy. I was already a dad, so I'd already worked out how to schedule. His came after the fact. Yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes I just think well, it's like I was listening to your podcast with Chase Ingram. I told you that earlier, so I'd heard that before, and I think I think it was Chase who was saying, kind of sometimes it's just being like he just happened to be in the right place at the right time, asking questions, and then they were like, well, why don't you come and try out to be on the broadcasting, things like that. Nothing that substantial has happened to me, but so I am a huge consumer of podcasts. Like, I don't listen to music, which freaks people out, but I don't really listen to music. So when podcasts became a thing, that was like wonderful. I finally have something to listen to all day. And I listen to like loads of, not just CrossFit podcasts, just a whole variety of things. And I mostly comedy, to be honest, and like entertainment, stuff like that. And I'd always wanted to do a podcast. And I did a podcast that had nothing to do with fitness at all. It was just, it was interviewing people. It was called A Conversation With. I don't know if it's still around. You probably can't find it. And I would have, I had some different like Australian comedians come on, or a person I used to work with that was from Russia, and we were talking about language, and it was all different topics and different, basically the idea was that you would come in and you would tell me about your topic. Like, you'd pick a topic and we would just talk about that, and I would see what I knew already and what I could learn, and then this was the idea. And I did a CrossFit one once with Arm & Hammer, who came on back when he was doing Arm & Hammer TV, and I think he was probably still doing Scale as Needed at the time. So we're talking a while ago. And and I did that one, and I just said to the box owner, like, I did this podcast about CrossFit. I could just drop it in the Facebook group if anyone wants to hear it. It's there. And then I stopped podcasting because life got very busy with kids and family and things like that, and it was hard to justify like a hobby that really brings you nothing. Which
and people don't realize just how time consuming it can be.
Yes, absolutely. And so I stopped, and then the owner of the box asked me, like, quite some time later, if I would be interested in doing one for the box. So I do the CrossFit Bath podcast, which I still do.
Right.
And it's up to like episode 158 or something like that. It's been running for a long time, but it's it's highlighting the members and the coaches and things of the local affiliate. But through that, I happened to kind of meet some other people, and like my former co-host I mentioned, Tom, and Sam LaRoche, who's an MC at a lot of events. And so we put together Plate Stack Chat, the original version, and it was the three of us. And then we were going to semi-finals in London. And as I said, Tom he had Chalking Fitness, so he was like a stats guy, and he knew everything about the UK CrossFit scene, who everybody was, what competitions they'd been to, where they finished. He did a deep dive, and Sam was there to MC, so he was also. So I was going there, and I was going to be on the media team for the semi-final, which was great, but I didn't feel like I had my own thing. And it was kind of a bit like, Tom's got his, we all three of us do Plate Stack Chat, but Tom's got this and Sam's got that. And I was like, I should really do my own thing. So I started doing these videos in the lead up to semifinals. And I would kind of just be like, I'm kind of tired of, because on the podcast, we gave our opinions about stuff, and it wasn't research. It was just like, this has happened. How do you feel? I feel this way. Great. And what was getting on my nerves, not with us in general, but just in general, was like everything that happens within CrossFit, people would talk about it, but it was always kind of, it felt like it was pitched in they've done this and this is how you should feel about it. And I didn't like that. I was like, well, just give me the facts. Just give me the facts and let me go away and make up my own mind. Or people just didn't know stuff. Like, you'd see a post on Instagram, like Morning Chalk Up would put up a post, and it would be an image and a headline. And if you read the comments, you'd realize that no one has read this article. They are all reacting on a headline. They are misinformed, and what they're saying doesn't make sense. And it's still like that even now. We're not just Morning Chalk Up, like whoever puts out a post. So I wanted to do these videos about kind of like, here's all the information you need on a topic. So this is, CrossFit have made this decision. This is why they're saying they're doing it. This is what other people are saying is maybe the reason. These are potentially some of the good things, some of the bad things, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
There's all the information. I'm not telling you how you should feel about it. There's the information. Go away, make up your own mind. So I'd done a couple of these, and very minuscule following. Few people knew who I was. And actually, let's go back to Chase once again. Somebody tried to get Chase fired, which was
yes.
Dropped my phone. Oh, just knocked my phone off my table. Which was very bad news for Chase, but great news for me because I made a video about it, and people saw the video and they kind of Savan played it on his podcast, and suddenly like overnight almost people that had never heard of me were like, oh, this guy's, we like him. I was like, thank you.
Yeah.
Because again, it was down the middle. It was, this is what's happened. I almost felt in that sense I didn't need to pick a side, because just giving people the facts, it was quite generally it's pretty obvious maybe who's in the right and who's in the wrong. But hey, there it was. And that's,
I can't remember for sure. That might have been around the time that I got introduced to your channel. I might have. I think I probably wound up on your channel even before that. But I remember taking particular note of the balanced approach, a not opinion driven piece that you did, and several different episodes came out. All, I wouldn't say in rapid succession, because you were spacing yourself out a fair bit, probably because of how much time they take to produce.
Yes.
But you were very balanced. You were, as you say, you were trying not to suggest how someone should feel about a particular issue. Instead, you were talking about, well, here are the pros and here are the cons and here are the different ways that this audience might feel about it versus this other audience. And that to me was something that was not happening terribly commonly, particularly within the CrossFit space, because everybody has a particular bent when they approach a given topic. And so I personally really liked that about the way that you were doing your videos, and that led me to devour as many videos as you were putting out. And when there was a gap, when you were sick or whatever the case was, I was anxiously looking to see if something else had been published.
And it hadn't. It hadn't. That was the problem. It is tough. I mean, like, going back to the time it takes, these things take time. They cost money. I went to a local event. I mean, it was huge. It's huge is relative. It's a big event because it's we have SID Origins, so Strength and Depth Origins. So Strength and Depth, that was obviously a sanctional event. It was a semi-final. In its initial iteration, it was a team competition. And so SID Origins is still a team competition, and they're big teams. They're teams of 12. And so as 100 teams of 12 is 1,200 athletes. So it's
that
sort of
has got to be a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's and it's very busy if you're going there to film, because they'll do like some events all 12, and then they'll split them into two teams of into sub teams of 6, and 6 go to the swimming pool and 6 go to the track, and it's like, which is great. But if you're trying to record stuff, you're like, I can't get everybody. And they deliberately make it that certain things overlap so you cannot cheat. Like you can't, there's not enough time for that athlete to get out of the pool and get onto the field to do a different thing, because it's, so there's a strategy behind it all. But I was at that event the other day, and it's, it's actually in Bath. So it's like 10-minute drive for me. Brilliant. And somebody was saying like, oh, are you going, where else are you going this year? Like, are you going here? Are you going there? Are you doing anything like outside of the UK? And I'm like, do you realize that every event I go to, everything I make costs me, like I lose money doing this? It's not
right.
So I'm not doing a lot of those things actually, not at the moment anyway. So that's kind of the issue with the videos, is it's that justifying what you're doing as well. Like, I know it's good. I like what I do. I enjoy it. When I enjoy it, it's easy to make. It's so easy. Um, sometimes the trouble is you have to consume a lot of information to have a balanced approach, and I can find that depressing sometimes. And if I don't, I do remember there was a period where I took a long break. It was probably a month that I didn't put anything out, and it was meant to be a week. I took a week off because I just couldn't do it. I needed to get some stuff done, so I took a week off from making videos, but I still went to the gym and I was still training and I was still talking about CrossFit with the people at the box. And I was like, no, this is great. This is lovely. Everybody's positive. Oh, it feels nice. And then I was like, oh, every time I'm researching stuff, I'm just hearing so much negativity and people being angry about stuff. And it was like, oh, it was kind of almost, do I want to go back into that? I could just sit here where it's all nice. But I did.
Yeah.
And it's
there are
fine.
certain hot button issues that you've addressed that I'm sure were wrapped up in that. So I remember you did an episode where you were talking about the affiliate fee increase and the different perspectives about how that could be taken by different audiences. And you were soliciting feedback from members of the community. And so you were presenting some of that feedback in your episode that you constructed after getting that feedback. And I have to imagine you editorialized quite a bit in order to level out what you were able to share about that whole experience.
Yeah, I guess people, I mean, to a degree, like I want to make sure that I guess it's stripping back any kind of not strong opinions, but like you don't want to over egg the pudding, I guess, as they say. Like you don't want to kind of, oh, I'm going to put in loads of people that felt this way,
right,
and then few that feel that way. But at the same, you want it to be balanced.
Even that would skew it.
Yeah. So, you could say like, oh, I spoke to these 5 people and they all hate it. Yeah. And you're like, yeah, but that's just because they're the 5 people I spoke to. Like, if I'd spoken to 100 people, probably the numbers would be more even, or the different thing. Sometimes I just, well, it's funny because sometimes I think, what am I doing? It's silly because all the information is there, right? Like, quite often, if I can get direct information from people, great. Sometimes I just can't, or sometimes I don't need to, because actually what I'm reporting on is been said on, this person went on to 5 podcasts and this is what he said.
Right.
And here's all the information. So I can just clip bits of podcasts and be like, there you go. And then you think, well, that information's out there. Surely everybody knows that. But I don't know when this is coming out. But
I'm
hoping tomorrow. Wow. Just in time for the Open.
We'll see.
Well, if this comes out tomorrow, the next day is coming out an episode of Plate Stack Chat with, well, I was going to say Jeff Adler. It's not. It's James Sprague. I don't know why.
A fantastic athlete in his own right.
Fantastic athlete. And Tyler Watkins, who is a good athlete, but he's better known for other things. And we're talking about the Open. And I was saying to James that there's not really going to be like floor plans this year as there used to be. And he's like, oh, well, I didn't know this. And I was like, well, yeah, this is what like Boz said on the Games podcast, was that, and I said, actually, it's interesting that a lot of these things have only been introduced kind of during the COVID era, when the online competition needed to be more strict and stringent. And it was, there was more online stuff that was kind of higher level, like almost, the virtual games basically. And that's when equipment lists and floor plans and all of that really solidified what they were. Prior to that, we didn't really have them. Okay. Right. And so we're kind of going back to this. And I was saying that I'd been planning to like do a video on the Open, but time just got away from me and I just didn't have time to kind of put together these things. And I sort of thought, oh, well, everybody, like all the information's out there, everybody knows it. And then they don't. And then another thing was, Dave had been on Savan's podcast and he'd mentioned on that podcast that he was at least going to be doing the announcement for 24.1.
Right.
And then, but like this week, CrossFit put up a post that 24.1 is going to be announced by Dave Castro, and everyone's in the company going, oh, wow, Dave's going to... And I'm again thinking, but we knew this. We knew that. If you've been paying attention, we already knew this. This has been told. Yeah. And these were all things that I wanted to include in this video that I just did not have time to make. Yeah. but it's just that really. I guess it's more just gathering the information and then putting it in one place. I mean, like, here you go, enjoy.
It's almost like you're serving kind of the same role as late night TV does, because so often people don't get their news from watching the news; they get their news from watching comedians talk about the news
Yes.
on late night TV. We've got kind of a similar thing happening within the CrossFit space where there's so many different channels through which information is coming out, and many of them are long format. So the time investment for somebody to sit down and actually learn about what's going on within the space is considerable. So when a video comes out on your channel where you distill the information in simple terms to allow them to better understand what the issues of the day really are, I think that might be why the audience is so responsive to the material that you're putting out.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think so if I talk about someone, it's happened almost every time if I've done a video about a person, because generally it's like it's things, but occasionally you're talking about a person or something that's happened. Pretty much
Sure.
any time I've done a video about a person, they've messaged me and been like, "Yeah, that was good. That was balanced. That was fair." Like,
Yeah.
I think when it was people that like didn't qualify, their team had broken a rules, or they didn't feel like the team qualified for. I think it was one of the teams from Norway that were like, "Oh, one of your athletes shouldn't be on the team because they couldn't prove they'd been training at that box long enough,"
Where
and
they
things
lived,
like,
yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. And I would talk about that from CrossFit's point of view, why they feel this way, or the I mean, people have been talking about it this year, and I haven't really bothered to jump in on the conversation, but like the exemption rules, why this athlete is allowed to compete and this one's not. And again, like, if just there's reasons, you can look into it, and you might disagree with what CrossFit's saying, but here's the information, it's there. You can
Yeah.
find it. But generally, when I've spoken about someone like in these situations, they've kind of been like, yeah, fair, good, I agree, which is nice. And I would say I've had messages from people that I greatly respect within the media world or the CrossFit world, commenting on stuff that I've done and saying nice things. And that's great. I really like that. Of course, that does not blow up your channel because being
Right.
fair and down the middle and, calm, cool, collected, considerate, that doesn't drive clicks.
No, you're right. Outrage.
Inflammatory, outrage, being angry.
Yeah.
And that is not, and that's not me being like, oh, it's because Hillers shouts, that's why people no, because it's not even just about CrossFit. That's just YouTube. It's just like,
Right.
you if you do a movie review and you're like, yeah, it was right, it was okay. People don't like that. They want you to be angry
Right.
and say, oh, this is the worst movie ever. And it's like,
Point
which
out the flaws, etc.
I mean, going back to me consuming huge amounts of podcasts, I listen to a podcast every week called The Weekly Planet, and it's like a movie pop culture kind of show, and
Right.
they review a movie every week as well, and their ranking system is best movie ever, worst movie ever, because they're like, nothing else exists in the internet. It's either the best thing ever or it's the worst thing ever. And if you say it, if you say you like it, it means you saying it's the best movie ever. If you say you don't like it, it means it was the worst movie ever. So they've just kind of
Right.
are playing with that, going like, well, we might as
Lean
well
into
just,
it. Yeah.
we might as well lean into it. And that's the thing, isn't it? So it's nice. Yeah. I appreciate the kind comments I've had from people in the CrossFit world.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I've spoken with people in the past as well. It's like, yeah, I could, I could tank it all on like this video. I could go off on one and really, manipulate things to seem one way or another. But I also feel like the only thing I really have going for me is my reputation. In that if I talk about something, people generally know there is no bias there. I'm not trying to make you feel one way or the other. I don't care how you feel about this. I just want you to, this is the information. Here you are, you're an adult, go away and make up your own mind is my philosophy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important to know who you are and what you want to say in the space. And I think that's something that has really demonstrated itself time and time again with your approach to the material that you cover, how you choose your topics, the level of detail, and the thoughtfulness with which you approach the topics. I think that's what really shines, and I think there's a demonstrated consistency there with the now long series of videos that you've released, particularly when you've been focused on the analytical side with your videos. Now, you've done a little bit of a pivot recently in order to make sure that you've got enough content to feed the beast, so to speak. How did Plate Stack Chat come back in the form that it takes now?
Yeah, I kind of miss just talking to people. I just like talking about stuff. So we used to do it, and you know, it was kind of one of we had to record it every Monday night. It was like fixed in. That was when we needed to record it, and we were all getting busy, and life, you know, throws things in the way, and yeah, you know, Tom had a kid. Sam and I both also had children, but as I said, we'd had, you know, our kids were a little bit older. We were already a little bit more established with that, and it's kind of different when the newborn arrives. And so it got hard to sustain, so it went away basically. And we initially had a break, and then that break just became perpetual. And I'd still see Sam at events, Tom less so, but we still chat. I mean, we spoke today actually, so we still keep in touch. But I wanted to. I wanted to speak a little bit more to the athletes and just the people in and around, basically kind of help get to know people better, because I kind of felt like we see a certain side of people. We see them on Instagram. We see what they want us to see on Instagram. It's kind of that highlight reel thing. But I just wanted to get to know people just a bit more casually, and not necessarily with a, it's the game season is approaching, so what's your plans for the CrossFit Games, and what's your training look like, and what's your nutrition, but more just just a chat about whatever's going on with them at the moment, kind of thing. And I mean, it's funny you talk about, and I don't think I've said this anywhere, so I will reveal this here, is my inspiration behind like the kind of format I'm going with now. So as much of a rod for my own back as it is, I want 2 guests on minimum, like at the same time, every time, which is very interesting in scheduling people. You know, I'm in the UK. A lot of them are in parts of America or
You've had
Australia,
quite a few North American
or wherever they may be. So, you know, quite often, and obviously, even if you're just like, we're in America or the Americas, it's like, great, which time zone? At least if they're in the UK, they're like, I'm in the UK. I'm like, great, I know that 8 o'clock is 8 o'clock. Whereas I'm constantly, sorry, which time zone are you? Oh, it's like PST, EST. Okay, I don't know what that is. Mountain Standard Time. What's that? That just comes out of nowhere. So I'm constantly trying to link these things up. But I remembered, and ironic that I'm being interviewed on a show where I, you know, as someone who normally interviews, because it was somebody being interviewed who normally interviews. But I think it was, who are your late night hosts? Who are the late night hosts? And Seth Meyers.
Seth
That's
Meyers.
who it was. It was Seth Meyers. So Seth Meyers was interviewing Graham Norton, who obviously does the Graham Norton show, like in England, and you know, and has had incredible guests on, and he,
very good interviewer.
Yeah, and they were talking about his, like, you know, his show and the interviews and some of the stories that these guests tell, and like, you know, they can't believe that, you know, Tom Cruise would tell that story, or you can't believe that. And he was saying about that, you know, when you're kind of, and it's not the same with CrossFitters or these people, but I kind of took a little bit of inspiration from it. But he was saying, you know, when celebrities hit a certain point, they don't care about the audience. Like, they don't care. So they're not going to play up for the audience. They're not going to come out with some elaborate story to impress the audience, because the audience, they don't care about them. But they will show off for other celebrities. Like, that's, you know, and so I was like, oh, that's interesting, isn't it? So the idea is kind of, if I can have 2 guests, like, they can play off each other. And then I can sort of, I can steer the ship a little bit and direct conversation a little bit. But the idea is that
Yeah.
they'll say something and the other guest will jump in because they've got an interesting story about that, or they've got an interesting question, or they've seen something, and kind of let them play off each other a bit.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of the inspiration behind trying to revamp the show a little bit and do it like that. So I try to present it kind of like a almost like a late night talk show kind of style. Like, every time I introduce my guests, I give them a little pep talk before they come on. Like, this is this guest, and here's, they've done this and done that, and and welcome.
Yeah.
And then we don't necessarily dwell on that aspect, but we talk about, other stuff sometimes. So sometimes it's interesting. It depends a lot on the guest. It depends a lot on the guest. I messaged. Actually, it was James Sprague afterwards. He sent me a message about something, and I just said, "Yeah, it's like you're a great guest. It's great to have a guest. It's great to have a guest that talks, that's like cheerful, happy, like volunteers information. That's the dream." So look out for that episode. That was a good one.
There's certainly a natural energy that comes from having multiple guests, because like there's instances where they'll jump in with a question. It could even be the same question that you might have asked, and they just happen to get it, or they have their own perspective on that particular topic that they want to be able to ask about. So yeah, I mean, it certainly lent itself to giving you a little bit of energy that I wouldn't say wouldn't be there otherwise, but it's noticeable that energy is present.
Or it would just be that, like, I mean, if you want to hear like James Sprague be interviewed, just there's so many other podcasts that will have just done a straight interview, or Errol Owen, or whoever, like, whatever athlete it is, or whatever person is, you can guarantee that they've probably been on Coffee Pods and Wads, or they've been on Savan's podcast, or they've been on Talking Elite Fitness, and there's an interview. Like, you can go in and they'll I don't think I'm going to go and suddenly ask them some question that Savan had never thought of, or Peter had never thought of. So it's like, well, there's your interview. You want to go and hear them talk about themselves? That's great. If you want to go and hear them talk about other stuff that's not necessarily about themselves, but, just other stuff in general, then come have a listen to this and maybe you'll enjoy it. It's still a work in progress. It's quite a loose format, but I kind of feel like a lot of the stuff I do is based on not copying other stuff, because like Plate Stack Chat and the Graham Norton Show are two very different shows.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's just like taking a little bit of a gem from something, one element he mentioned on something that works in his show, and going, oh, that's quite interesting. That's quite good. I could incorporate that. It's similar with any of the videos I do, whether it's like the news ones, or recently I've been going to more events, and like now I'm going to be traveling around for the Open, and I'm always behind the camera and I'm not in front of the camera on these things, and it's hard to strike a balance on this. But there was a YouTuber who does like tech reviews, phones and things like that. His name's Marcus. I want to say it's like Marcus Brown or something like that. But I remember seeing, it wasn't even him. It was another YouTuber talking about certain YouTubers that are, have done well in their field. And one of the things they were saying about him compared to other YouTubers that were like reviewing a phone. So if he's reviewing a phone, the focus of the video is the phone, and it is like the star. If you had to pick a star of the video, it's the phone. Whereas other reviewers, the star is themselves. And it's like, here's me reviewing this phone, and this is what I think of this phone. And it's like, where's the focus? The focus is on you, not on the phone. And so I wanted to approach everything I did with this idea of, if it's a story about a decision CrossFit's made, the star of the video should be the decision that's been made. It shouldn't be me. And if I'm like going to these events, so they're not they're like, I'm going and I'm recording what's happening. And I called the other one I did behind the scenes, but which it was, and it was the best name for it. But I kind of, I realized, you've got like Savant's behind the scenes. It is insane. Like, so good. And it's kind of, I'm not doing that, but it's also not a vlog. It's not about me. Like, I'm not the star of these videos. It's the volunteers, it's the athletes, it's everyone else. So it's, I need to find a better name for it. And the same with like going around, like I'm doing a UK tour of the Open.
Yeah.
But the I'm doing it bit is really not like the focus on it. I don't want that to be the focus on it. It's not like, hey, I went to Dragon. Hey, I went to Glasgow. I want it to be, this is Dragon Athletics.
Right.
They're an affiliate. They've been an affiliate for this many years. How do they get their members to be, signed up for the Open? And then get the members, like, why did you sign up? How many years have you been doing it? It's your first year. It's your 10th year. Like, why do you keep coming back? Really highlight the community. And the fact that I'm there should not matter. Like that's the least of it. So that's kind of the goal, is to drive the focus there. But that's interesting as well, because I was like, so I'm jumping all over the place now. I'm so sorry, John.
That's all right.
But like Dave Castro was talking about this on the Savant podcast, and he was talking a little bit about how like the media people kind of all want to be stars themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking it's an interesting balance to strike, because on the one hand, like, we're not making money doing this. Like, actually, like, you don't make money traveling to an event to record something. You lose money doing that because you pay your travel and all that. So the way you're going to make money is by getting sponsorship or, being reimbursed for your expenses somehow.
Right.
But people are only going to do that if they know who you are, if like you are. So it's like a funny
you
line
have to have
you
a brand
need to
of
walk.
your own.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, you can't blame, Craig Ritchie for trying to make a name for himself if that's going to pay his way to do all of this stuff. Like, you want the content that they're making, right? You want people to be talking about CrossFit.
Yeah.
But there needs to be something in it for them, because otherwise, we're just going to stop because we can't afford, you'll be like, okay, I feel it's a similar thing with judging events. You've got people that are willing to travel around and judge, but at a certain point, they're going to be like, you know what, it's getting pretty pricey now, and budget's not maybe what it once was, and they have to start making different decisions. And I feel like with content creation, it's a similar thing. You're going to have people that are getting paid to do what they're doing, basically, or at least getting reimbursed, and they can keep doing it. And then other people do it because they have a passion for it. And then, depending on many circumstances in life, that passion will either continue, or it will be like, I still love it, but I cannot justify it. And that's sort of where you see this break away from it. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably been quite a number of podcasts, YouTube channels, etc., that have started with the best of intentions as a passion project. Somebody was really driven and eager to share what they had in that particular topic, and then real life does tend to intrude, whether they get too busy or the sheer energy that they're putting into it and what they get back out of it just doesn't justify continuing. I mean, it's an ongoing challenge. I mean, with this podcast, I just do it because I like to talk to other people in the space. It affords me the ability to message somebody like you and say, hey, I'm in the space. I'd really like to talk to you about your perspective. And these are conversations that I wouldn't get to have otherwise. So, for me, it's just a selfish pleasure to be able to talk to people that I really want to talk to, whether I'm consuming their content or whether they're in some other area that is related to the CrossFit space.
I do think that's good. I mean, ultimately, because that's the other problem, isn't it? If you go into it with the other motive of like, I'm going to do this to make money, then that's wrong.
It's a very quick road to disappointment.
So it has to be
such a small number of people that can do that.
So it has to be that like for me, it's, I don't expect to make anything from this, but it does mean I have to really manage what I commit to, and sort of say, well, I'd love to do this, but that's going to be, that's not really in my budget at the moment. Or, I was hoping to go there. I was speaking to Lauren Khalil literally before recording this podcast, and like offhandedly said something about the games, and then I was like, well, actually, Rogue is going to be in Scotland this year, so
In
it's
Scotland, yeah.
so I was like, it's so close. And she's like, yeah, it's so close to you. I was like, yeah, but maybe that's worse because it's like it's so close, but still out of reach. Whereas at least
Yeah.
when it was in America, I'd be like, well, that's what far too far for me to travel for an event, like
I mean, you'll
especially
save yourself airfare at best, but
yeah,
I mean, it's still an expensive endeavor to go to an event.
yeah, that I have to justify to my family.
Yeah.
but but as you were saying, like the passion of just enjoying talking to people in the space, like that's why I started the other podcast. I would just I was listening to podcasts and I was like, oh, I listen to this person's podcast. I'm going to message them and see if they'll talk to me. And that's how I got
Yeah.
loads of, the majority of my guests were other people that had podcasts. Maybe, as I said, maybe they were like a comedian, but they also had a podcast. I was like, great, come on and we'll talk about writing comedy, or we'll talk about, whatever you want. You had crazy stuff. There was a guy from, there was like I can't even remember what it was called now, but there was like a cake show where they would like make these insane, like huge cakes. I think the main guy was like called Buddy or something. And there was quite a kind of eccentric guy who did a lot of like the modeling on the cakes and stuff.
Yeah.
And he came on, and I initially was like, oh, we're going to talk about cakes. And he was like, no, I want to talk about like tabletop role playing games. I was like, okay, let's
Sure.
talk about that. Like, great. So that was fun. But it is funny. Some, you like, it's nice. I've spoken to people that I wouldn't imagine I would have the opportunity to chat to, and that's been really nice. And like Gladiators is on TV at the moment, or actually maybe it's just finished, I don't know, but my son loves it. He's he loves Gladiators, and we're sitting down and watching an episode of Gladiators, and I'm messaging Zach George, and we're chatting, and then I'm like showing him that's still like he's on the TV, but we're talking now. It's like, great. And then I went to this event at the university here in Bath with the teams, and Zach's on a team there. And so I'm like talking to him and I grab a quick interview for, the YouTube and the event and like kind of the proper interview. And then we stop and then I'm like, turn the camera back on. I'm like, okay, Zach, and now I need one for my son who is a big fan. And like, that's great. It's these are wonderful like opportunities, and like Fit Fest was amazing, getting to speak to a load of the athletes there, or even for me, quite often it's not even the athlete. Like I met, Lauren Khalil that I'd spoken to on a number of occasions, and we'd recorded together and done stuff. We'd never met face to face, and so we actually got to meet. And like it's like, oh, this is amazing. We're meeting face to face. So sometimes it's just that, like, and I do really love it. I went to an event last weekend, and it was great. Like, and it's a a relatively small event. It was nice because it was athletes I'd never, like the majority, I don't think I'd met any of them before. They were all kind of from different boxes, mostly around Wales, and a few from England as well. Oh, brilliant, great fun, like such a nice spirit. Like even the judges were not because I quite often have gone to similar like events run by kind of the same sort of people. You kind of know the judging teams and those that do those events. These were like judges I'd never met before, all these different people. And I love it. It's like, oh, it's so great. Like, seeing the different parts of the community and seeing everyone like just chip in, and then seeing like kind of, your weekend warriors just absolutely sending it. Just bodies hitting the floor at the end of some of these events. It's like, this is great fun. I do enjoy it. And I think that's really important, that you, going back to like the kind of, if you're just looking at the news or just what people are reporting on and just, the negativity, sometimes you can lose that joy. And then as soon as you lose that joy, you're like, well, why do I want to record a video about this? Why do I want to sit down, I mean, the videos I put out are maybe 10 minutes long, like if that. Like the podcasts are longer because I don't have to edit them very much. Like like I know your technique as well. Similar technique, cut the ends off, done.
Yeah.
But like the actual videos I do, especially when I'm having to splice in clips from other podcasts, I've had to record and this and that, and it takes. Yeah, I know sometimes I'm like saying to my wife, like, oh, I'm just gonna do a quick video. I'm just gonna pop up. I'll just record it. Even just recording it, multiple takes. Sometimes you're like, you do it, and you're like, why did I? idiot, I said the wrong thing. Like, that's the wrong. Or you'll say something and then I'll look at my phone and realize there's been an update and now that information is slightly changed, and I'm like, I gotta edit something and re-record this.
Yeah.
So it's so time consuming, but it's fine if you're enjoying it. But as soon as you're not enjoying it, it's like, you know. And then I've got to also not let it eat into my time of actually training. I should do the stuff myself. I can't just talk about it.
Yeah. I got to say the podcast was one of the more interesting things that I got out of the podcast was, so I did my L1 back in 2016, I believe, and then in 2020 or maybe early 2021, I can't remember. I think it was late 2020. I got to interview Pete Shaw, who is a CrossFit redshirt. He did my L1, so I sort of vaguely knew him. So I made sure that I used that in my appeal to him to come onto the podcast. And at the time, we were in the throes of all of the government shutdowns of the boxes throughout the country. Right. Every gym was shut down. They were talking about what the rules would be if they were ever allowed to open up again in the middle of COVID. And Pete was a very strong, forceful voice in Ontario, fighting to have the gyms reopen, really pitching it as these are healthcare centers. They're not just physical facilities. We need these open in order to protect people from viruses like this. Why aren't we talking about that? And he was battling back and forth with the government of the time, and I thought that he had a very interesting perspective, and so I pitched him on the idea of coming on and talking about that. And then I was extremely fortunate. He came back to Halifax and did my L2. Nice. And so it was fantastic. I was able to catch up with him, find out how things are. Not only is he, an exceptionally gifted trainer, but just the nicest of guys and a very level-headed person. So he was a really special guest for me to be able to get on the podcast. And I was very, very pleased and selfishly very happy with myself that I was able to talk myself into even asking him in the first place, because I very often, I'm reticent to message somebody that I don't know and see if they want to come on, because I don't want them to think like it's all about me. I want it to be about them. And so that's what I've tried to make the podcast be very focused on my guests as much as possible, and just inject a little of my own experience in order to help steer conversations around the subjects that I think people might want to hear about. Has that been your approach with like guests that you're asking to come onto the podcast for your interviews?
Yeah, I guess it's funny, isn't it? Like, as you said, to kind of approach people, and so sometimes it's a little bit like, okay, who have I spoken to? Who have I interacted with? So very quick. So I'm pitching it slightly differently now, because I sent it out to a bunch of people initially as a look. It's another CrossFit podcast. I know. I'm sorry. But it's not an interview. Like, this is what I kind of said is like, look, I want to do a show. I want to have two guests, and I want it to be a conversation, and you've got to feel free to interrupt and ask them questions, and they'll ask you. And it's just for people to get to know you better, not just what we said. Like, that was kind of the pitch. But I really thought about it, and I sent it specifically to people that I had some interaction with in the past, or some I'd spoken to in the past, some I'd had on podcasts in the past, or I'd done a video on, or something like that. Or just we'd engaged for some, maybe there was just someone I asked some information from. And so basically it's that if you send them the message, it goes into the primary inbox and not into the request inbox. That was the key.
Yeah.
So that was the initial thing. And then I recorded a load of episodes. So now maybe I've done 8 or 9 have already come out, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think that's one a week, time flies, huh?
Yeah.
And so now I've changed the pitch a little. So like when I asked James to come on, that was the first time I changed it to, hey, I've got a podcast where I've had some like incredible guests on already, and I'd love to add you to that list, because and you can go and listen to kind of like a mini pitch, but feel free to go and have a look. And if it's something you think you'd like to do, let me know. He messaged back instantaneously with yes, let's do it. So that was nice. but I think it's nice once you've got a little bit of a back catalog, you can sort of say, well, look, you might not, you might not want to do it, but like, and I think then that's where it's also important to have balance with your guests as well. Because I think if you had all kind of, because there are certain cliques or camps or things within CrossFit and CrossFit Media and just CrossFit in general where you're going to be like, oh, you're on their team or you're on their side. So trying to make sure you get everyone involved.
Yeah.
Then people aren't going to look and be like, oh, I don't want to talk to you because I already know, I know your agenda. Like, I don't have an agenda. I don't care. I don't have an agenda. Just come on. I just want to chat. And chat about anything really. So that's kind of how I pitch it. And I do. I mean, one thing that actually has been really helpful, like, I mean, I keep mentioning James just because he's the most recent guest, but he's also one of the guests who I had never spoken to, like not spoken to in person, but hadn't really interacted with at all, even like over Instagram or anything. Right. So I wanted him on because I saw him on the behind the scenes, and I was like, oh, he seems fun. And I can use that. Fun is good. Like that's easy to talk to. So sometimes it's kind of like that. I think if there's, like Ariel Lowen, similar, that I'd met her at FitFest very briefly, but she always seemed, kind of very, very chill and relaxed. And I was like, oh, sorry, I suddenly thought the recording had stopped. I was panicking for
God,
you.
I hope
it
not.
hasn't. No, it hasn't. It hasn't. Oh, sorry. So she was another one like immediately on the list because I was like, oh, I had a nice chat with her, but she seems like she'd be a lot of fun on it. And then other people that I was like, I know these people, I've talked with these people a bit. They're not necessarily the biggest names comparatively, but they, but they're interesting people. They've got fun stuff to say. And I think, and I think sometimes like linking up these pairings could be quite nice. I'm already thinking who to team you up with when you come on. So that would be nice. I haven't told you yet. I haven't invited you yet, but you'll get a message from me shortly.
I got to say, so for Chase Ingram was one of the folks that I spoke to as well that was incredibly generous with his time. I had messaged him out of the blue. I had never had a conversation with him. And I messaged him. It was the year that they had the kayak thrown into the games. And I messaged him right as the games were finishing. And I said, I thought you did a great job with this year getting kayaks thrown in as a curveball that you, I'm sure, had all of 24 hours to bone up on how to provide color commentary on this completely new implement that everyone was trying to figure out while they were out on the course. I'd love to talk to you on the podcast about how you get ready for the games. Let's talk towards the games next year. So I waited an entire year before I actually had him on, but he was very quick to message me back and say, yeah, thanks. It's always challenging being part of the media team and not knowing what the events are going to be ahead of time. And just because we've got experience as CrossFitters doesn't mean we're not going to see something entirely new.
I think that's the key, isn't it? It's just keeping those relationships going, like, and not responding with, okay, great, do you want to be on my podcast? Like within 10 seconds of, but now and again you kind of keep them going, and then you're like, hey, by the way, would you like to come on my podcast? Which is funny because it feels like everything is, I don't know. On the one hand, you feel like, oh, is anything genuine? Like, are all these conversations me just trying to kind of appease someone so that eventually I can ask them to come on my podcast? But at the same time, like, it's good for, ultimately it's good for them as well. Like the more exposure they get, and admittedly, even if we're not the biggest shows, within the space, it's good. It's a good opportunity. They'll talk about things that maybe, they haven't said other places, or, you'll just ask a question in a different way and they'll be like, oh, actually,
I'd like
that question.
So. Yeah.
And I think it's good. And I think, Actually, it's the thing I always worry about with CrossFit as CrossFit becomes more professional, as it grows, is do we start to lose some of those relationships? Like, it's nice now that you can message people like on the games field and send them a message and you get a reply.
Yeah,
That's not a lot of sports that you can do that.
true.
But will that disappear? Because it felt like it was going away a bit, and then it seems to have come back. Like, it feels like there was a brief period where some of the elites became a little bit more aloof and a little bit harder to get hold of.
I think they
And
had some social media managers that were kind of in between them and the audience that was messaging them for a time, and some appear to have backed off of that and prefer the direct contact.
yeah, and I've maybe realized that actually it's good for them. Like, it's good for
Yeah,
people. People need to, like, you are the brand. People need to know you.
yeah,
And people can see when it is all just manufactured content and it's just coming from an agency. And I think
yeah,
they like to get to know the real you a little bit. But definitely there are organizations or people in place that can make it a few extra hoops to jump through. And sometimes it's just a few hoops to jump through, and that's fine. And sometimes it's
yeah.
a door slammed quite sternly in your face. But hey, that's life. But I think I just think it's not, it's also a global sport. Like, that's another interesting element of it, right? We've got
Mm,
people all over the world, which means we get athletes from all over the world, but it also means you get podcasts and or YouTube channels or things from all over the world. And I think that's, I mean, we mentioned like Peter, so he's got this incredible podcast now. He's done so well for himself, but he's coming from Ireland. It's a completely different sort of viewpoint to what a lot of the North America based podcasts are going to be, because it's just
yeah,
we just have a different way of looking at the world. There are, I mean, I follow some people on social media that are in other countries where it's like I'm having to hit translate on half the posts just to know what they're talking about. But it's like, well, it's
right.
interesting. They've got a different viewpoint. They're different things matter to them. Like, these are the priorities.
Mm,
And so as much as you can do that, like, I love to. It's tricky because obviously a podcast is so much speaking and it's English, and you might not be super
yeah.
comfortable. It's fun. I was chatting with Enrico Zanoni at FitFest, and I was like, saying, "Look, I can speak in Italian if you want." He's like, "No, no, I'm going to speak in English." I'm like, "Good, let's do it." But I'd love to maybe ask him to come on, but I'm just waiting a little bit to be like, I just want to make sure he's comfortable with doing
Right.
a whole podcast in English, especially when you've got another guest and people could be jumping in with things and stuff. So hey,
Yeah.
watch this space, see who else comes.
So
Uh,
with the open starting this week, where are you headed first with your tour?
so week one, I will be at Dragon Athletic in Cardiff, Wales.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I have spoken with the owner, that is Andy Edwards, who is, I think he's on seminar staff, or at least he was, has
Mm-hmm.
coached or worked with quite a number of athletes as well. Uh, Recently, I saw like a post from Kelly Friel, that's a Masters champion. Like, I think she won the last 2 years in her age division at the games,
Mm.
but coming from the UK. And I saw that he was in quite a few of the pictures, even though she's down in Southampton and he's in Wales. But so he's like a very experienced man in the world of CrossFit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, it would be nice to go up there and see how he's and his team have sort of got their gym involved, because it's interesting to see how people approach the open. Obviously, not everyone is trying to make it to the games. So how do you get the community involved? How do you make it this mass participation event?
Right.
So that's week one. Heading up to there. It's not that far for me, actually. It's a relatively easy drive. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then week two, I'll be in Glasgow in Scotland at
Mm-hmm.
CrossFit Glasgow, which has been featured like during the Open a number of years they've thrown to like in the the preview shows and stuff, they've thrown to CrossFit Glasgow because they always get an insane number of signups for the Open, which is incredible. So Ian and Gav, they're the owners who are recently, you may have seen pop up on the new affiliate council thing. What's that called? The
Oh,
I don't know what that
I
thing
can't
is,
remember what
but
they've officially called it now.
yes. So they're both on that. So I might be able to get some little extra information while I'm up there. And they also do like the programming, and they're the sports directors for the strength and depth events as well. So they've been heavily involved. So that's sort of how I've known them anyway. And then week 3 will be at CrossFit Bath, back in my local affiliate, which even that is, that's a long running affiliate. We've got, the co-owners, but one of the co-owners is Ollie Mansbridge, who is the European manager, the CrossFit European manager. So he's sort of doing the job that Chase does for that part of America, but he's doing it for Europe.
Oh yeah.
He used to be the UK manager, and then he moved to being the Europe manager. And then Carl Steadman was the UK manager and has recently stepped down. So I think they're currently looking for a UK manager for CrossFit. So I don't know. I could throw my hat into the ring, but I don't think I meet any of the qualifications I look for. But so again, there's a lot of experience there, and that's a slightly different one because I know how they motivate the community a little bit more, and I kind of a little bit more on the, I get the message, I get the emails, right. I'm in the Facebook group, so I know what what into box team I'm on for the Open and things like that. So, but yeah, I think it'll be interesting just to try and highlight these different communities because it's nice, right? It's the Open, it's a global event. Let's have a look around, and none of these boxes, at least that I'm aware of, are any athletes that really have expectations to go to the games. So this is not let's go get Brent Fikowski in stage 1 and see how he does his open submissions. Like that would be wonderful. I'll let you do that. You're your fellow countrymen. This is community. What are your average everyday? And it may be there's somebody that's like, I do the Open every year. Goal is semifinals. Great. That's wonderful. And there's somebody else that it's my first year doing the Open, and I've only been doing CrossFit for 6 months, and my coach said it would be a good opportunity to kind of benchmark where I am, and then next year I can see if I've improved. Wonderful. I love it. That's what I want to hear. Like that's the goal. Let's see if it works. And it
sounds like you're going to get a very interesting look at the Open experience in those different gyms that you'll be visiting.
Absolutely. And I must mention it because Rising Tide, that are a distribution hub. So if you want to get, we've talked about Chase a lot. If you want to get the OG Culture, I'm wearing one now, the OG Culture t-shirts and things like that, and you're in Europe or the UK and you don't want to pay the shipping fees from America, like Rising Tide, that's what they're doing. They are kind of, I guess they're buying in bulk, or they've got some deals that they're getting it into the country, and then you can buy it through them. And they have very kindly sponsored the UK tour because I went on around the whiteboard, and I won the first one that I was on, which gave me 30 seconds to say whatever I wanted. And I said I was doing a UK tour, and I very brazenly said, if anybody wants to sponsor a UK
sponsor
tour,
me,
let me know. And they said, hey, we listened to the podcast. What do you need?
That's fantastic.
So I have to shout them out if I'm talking about the UK tour, because they have gone above and beyond. And for me, this is really the first time that a company has sort of come aboard like this. So I want to do everything I can to promote them and build them and just show my appreciation, because I really do appreciate it. And as does my wife, probably. Because
oh yeah, I'm sure. So last question for you. With the tour coming up, and you've got some episodes of your podcast already done. The interviews are done, and you're just pending the release. Are you going back to doing some analytical videos, sort of interspersed in between podcast episode interviews?
Yeah, I mean, I should be. That's the goal, really. I just feel a little. So as I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it on this. I don't know if I told you off pod. Oh, I've lost where we are. I got really ill. I basically I had 2 chest infections at the
Yes,
same
I did
time.
catch that on your episodes.
Yeah, and it's funny because like not just not just in the world of CrossFit, but like in life in general, I was like, there's so many things that January basically didn't happen. Like
Yeah.
I didn't have a January, and I'm kind of like, and I was like, oh, I was home so much. I was only able to work like 2 days a week, and that was out of necessity. And I was like, I was at home so much. How come I couldn't accomplish anything? I was like, you were really, really ill. I was like, yeah, I know, but I was at home. I should have, I could tap on a keyboard. So that kind of threw me off. I haven't done anything. The idea is that the podcast comes out on Friday, but in the week there should be something else. I did this series of behind the scenes videos from Strength in Depth, and that obviously took a lot of time to kind of go through those. So I imagine the plan would be, at least for the Open, it will be that there should be a video coming out each week of the Open for a few days later from where I was. So you get the video from Dragon, the video from Glasgow, and hopefully that will come out maybe like on a Monday or a Tuesday, and then the podcast is on the Friday. So that might take all the time I have for those weeks of the Open.
For these next few weeks, yeah.
That being said, if something happens in the Open, if there's some big controversy, of course. Sure. But then definitely I want to go back to. I was even bouncing this idea of my wife the other day as well. It's like I really need to go back to these kind of like talking head videos, because that's it's interesting. I was talking to Roderick Lopez, Meme for Time, and I was saying about a video I put up from FitFest, and I was like, hey, I said it's weird because I got interview with BKG, interview with like Emma Lawson, who doesn't really do interviews, but like I got a bit of an interview with her, and like had all these different athletes, incredible athletes interviewed, and I put up this video and nothing. Like it seemed like nobody cared, and he was kind of saying, well, that's because we can get that from anywhere, and the reason they go to your channel is they want to hear what you've got to say on these topics. And I was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I don't think of it that way, but so I definitely want to get back to it. If you've got any, hey, I realize we've buried this now an hour into a podcast, so no one might hear this, but hey, if you want to put a clip up on social media somewhere, if anyone has something that they've like, if something happens and you think people aren't talking about this, or this is interesting, why is no one mentioning it? Just let me know and I'll dig into it. Like, the 2 biggest things I did probably were the Chase Ingram thing that kind of kicked me off initially.
Yeah.
And the European Championships when they didn't pay out the podium. That was a big thing for me. And that video, that ended up being a series of videos, like, because there were developments there.
Well, yeah, you did follow-ups.
I didn't know that they hadn't paid out because I wasn't at the event. I didn't know. Right. Nobody was talking about it. And somebody messaged me to say, are you going to talk about the Europe, like what happened at Euros? What happened? I don't know what happened. If you give me a little bit, I'll go digging. And then, and I dug on that one. I ended up, there was stuff I didn't put in videos, but I was on, we've got websites here because it's a UK based competition, which means it's a UK based company, which means there are websites I can go on to look at the financial records of these companies, or who's the director, or what's like, how come, suddenly a director has changed last minute, or like, so there was, and I was getting, there was things going on with like registration fees, and I was having athletes send me copies of, bank transfers where they'd paid stuff in or received.
Right.
And there was stuff that I was like, I'm not sure if I can include some of this stuff because this could, I could get done for really like, libel or slandering someone. So I was like, but I I dug deep, but because somebody told me. So if there's something going and you want me to investigate, let me know. But quite often I do rely on other people to at least point me in the direction of something.
Well, I think that natural curiosity is paying off.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to work out how to suddenly get an 8th day in the week for me, that would be great as well. Because that's probably all I really need.
I'll use that.
Yeah, but no, that's. So if you listened this far into the podcast, thank you very much. I really appreciate that, because it feels I don't even know what the word is now. I can't think. My brain is going at this point. It's been too long, but it does feel weird to talk a lot about myself and what I'm doing. It's not me. I like to talk about other people a lot more.
Well, I'm glad you were willing to have the tables turned today.
Yeah, and people will be like, "Oh, you didn't stop talking about yourself. You loved it." I'm like, "Well, I love to talk. I do. It's my podcast." But yeah, it feels a bit odd. So if you want me to talk about something else,
what we've been able to establish is what your process is, why you do what you do. I mean, to me, that was what I was most curious about in connecting with you in the first place, was, what your motivations are, what drives you, where your ideas come from. And I think you've spoken to that very well. And it's focused on the idea, not on you, which is exactly what you've been endeavoring with your channel in the first place.
Yeah, actually, what I really like is when I think sometimes you can have an idea or be like, "Oh, I'm going to do it this way," and then you don't always execute it the way you imagine, or the way or like you perceive it this way because you know all the elements behind it. Mm-hmm. But then when people watch it from outside who don't know they don't know what your goal was or your objective, they don't necessarily perceive it in the way you do or the way you think it will be received. And the nice thing that I found is that when I get positive feedback, it is generally, what I really like is how balanced you are. I really like how you're down the middle. I really like that you're not giving your opinion. And then I'm like, great, because that was the goal. That's what I wanted to do. So if you like that, that's good, because it means I'm achieving my goal of putting it that way. And I mean, it's a small channel relative to a lot of the much bigger YouTube channels. But what is nice is kind of the like ratio on the videos is very good. It's very good. There's not a lot of people voting on there, but it's like I can scroll through them all, and it's generally very skewed to positive. So I'm like, well, that's great. Beyond that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I can do. Get better at CrossFit, maybe, would be nice. But
that's what we're all after.
Yeah, and then get you on the podcast as well, because I think you'd add an interesting element.
I'm game. That would be fun.
Well. Yeah, but that's what I like about it is mixing it up with different people, like people that I don't want. Like I just use them as an example. I don't want to have Sean and Tommy on at the same time,
right?
Because they're always on. They know each other's stories. I'd rather get one on with someone else and then the other one on with somebody else, and like mix it up a bit.
There'd be a natural curiosity back and forth that wouldn't be present if the two already knew each other really well.
Yeah, and obviously, sometimes they do know each other. Like,
sure,
CrossFit's it's a very small world. So like if I got you on and Chase, I'd be like, "Oh, have you met?" "Oh yeah, actually we've done a podcast before." "Oh great, well that's fine." But you're not spending every day together. Like that's
right.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
I don't know. I assume you're not.
Well, Jason, thank you very much. We've spent at least double the time that I had originally promised for us to chat, but it was really nice to do a deep dive into your process, and hopefully people will get to know you a little bit through this and tune into your channel if they're not already, because if they haven't already, they're missing out.
Oh, well, it's kind of you to say. They might be like, an hour of him, that was probably enough. And they might say an hour. Well, he's edited this very heavily. He's cut it right down to 25 minutes. And I'd understand why.
All right, thank you, Jason. Sometime in the future, we'll reconnect and follow up, and I'm sure we'll have more stories to exchange.
It'd be great. I'd love it.
Man, it was fun to get to chat with Jason. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. All that's left is the M wrap-up. While I started this podcast before I became aware of Jason and started watching his excellent videos and listening to his podcast, I have most definitely been influenced by his approach to publishing his content. In much the same way as I do in my day job as a marketing professional and my part-time passion gig as a CrossFit coach, I'm constantly absorbing what I see and hear to find ways to internalize, personalize, and reuse. As T.S. Eliot said, good writers borrow, great writers steal. And that doesn't refer to plagiarism, it refers to the kernel of truth inside. It's what you take away and make your own. I've had many influences in my career and in my short time as a podcaster. A style to emulate, a clarity to bring to a topic, a balance to my approach. And so I'm grateful for the time that Jason spent with me as just another such communicator that I admire. The Open has begun. 24.1 was just announced, and those dumbbell snatches and burpees are going to create a world of hurt. Thanks, Dave. See you all on the leaderboard. If you like this episode, you know the drill. Please share it or maybe write a review on Apple Podcasts. You can email me feedback or even ideas for a future episode at podcast@boxjumper.ca, and of course you can find me online at boxjumper.ca, or follow me on Facebook and Instagram with the handle @boxjumperover40. Thanks again for listening. I hope you're subscribed on your favorite podcasting app so you won't miss the next episode when it's released. Until then, stay healthy, WOD happy, and WOD often.